The stupidest reason I've ever dropped a fic. I was so happy when I found a fic that was over 20,000 words, marked as complete, and the plot following a trope I really like. I snuggled down and started reading, prepared to spend the next couple hours immersed in a good story. Then, in the first dialogue conversation, the author used spat instead of said, in a context where it wasn't needed, and it completely took me out of the scene. Spat is a very harsh word to me, and is usually used in reference to disgust or anger, not in a fluffy story about found family. I shrugged it off and continued, thinking it might have been a typo, when it happened again. And again. Like every other sentence of dialogue was blank, he spat, instead of blank, he said, and by the end of chapter 1, I was getting a little annoyed. Then, the author's note at the end of the chapter. Everything was fine at first, just the usual thank you for reading and such, but the very last line was, God loves you so much. I'm not exaggerating the amount of so's. There were a lot. I've never clicked out of a fic faster in my life. I'm not particularly religious, and I have absolutely nothing against religion in general. However, I read fics to focus on a world other than my own, and having religion in the author's note felt like getting ice water dumped on me. Thank you to all who read my silly little rant. I hope you have a good day. If anyone wants to share their own reasons for dropping a fic in the comments, I'm more than happy to read them. I'm super curious. Credit to Reddit user PuzzleheadedLogic9 for starting this thread on the AO3 subreddit. And let's go read some answers. I once noped out of a fic when they used buccal cavity instead of mouth. Mind, the entire fic was written as though every other word was picked out of a thesaurus, but that was the limit for me. This sounds like published writer Cassandra Caw. The salt grows heavy, and nothing but blackened teeth were weird reads because of stuff like this. Not kidding. A predatory stillness drove a scream through my medulla oblongata happened in Nothing But Blackened Teeth, and that's a traditionally published novel. A fic once used pew dramatically to start a scene where the sibling of the main character is killed by their parents, and I don't even know what to say to that. I don't know whether that makes me want to laugh or cry from being used unironically. They didn't spell the main character's name correctly. One of the main characters in a small fandom I'm in is called Connor. He's Irish. The story is set in Ireland. The tags on AO3 list his name as Connor with 1 N. The amount of fics that spell it Connor with 2 N's is ridiculous. Honorary mention to a fandom that has 1 fic on AO3, and the main character, Gemma, is called Genma the whole way through, and in the character tag. I stopped one that used a weird character nickname over and over and over. I gave up once it got steamy, and they used the nickname more. Babe, oh my god, babe. Description of act. Babe. Description of act. Babe. Like this exactly for paragraphs, not at all exaggerated. Drove me up the wall. I struggle with pet names most of the time. If characters have actual pet names they give each other in canon, that's totally fine, but anything other than that is admittedly on thin ice. It feels like it's gotta be natural for the characters and the setting. My favorite character's name is Kazuha, and a character in a fic affectionately referred to him as Zuzu? I could feel the repulsion and confusion in my body, but tried to push through to give it a chance. They called him it again, and I immediately closed the fic. Respect to the authors, I just can't do it. There was one I read where instead of spat, the author's favorite word was murmured. Every other paragraph they were murmuring to each other. For me, murmurs are said so softly that it's barely audible, but are clearly enunciated and understandable, as long as you are close enough to hear. I was like, how are these characters holding a conversation over the dinner table if everyone is murmuring? And sometimes they used murmured instead of mumbled, so I could never tell if the words were supposed to be clearly understandable or not. There was a fic I read that was really good, 20 full chapters, and it was finished. Of course, I read the entire thing. But the one thing that ate at me the entire time was that the main character kept screaming. Like, if someone hugged them, scream. Someone poked them, scream. Someone called their name randomly, scream. I'm not exaggerating it. It was honestly unnecessary and didn't fit any of the scenes. So I blocked it out as I read. I was reading a Batman fic set in the Arkham games, in which Bruce didn't actually investigate anything, he pulled up detective mode. And okay, you could do something cracky and fun where you weave gameplay mechanics into the narrative for comedy, or as commentary about the difficulty of translating a character thinking into something both interactive and engaging, or whatever. This was not that. Totally straightforward story in which Batman inexplicably has magical vision that allows him to see enemies through walls and objects glow orange so that he understands they're important. The very last chapter was labeled Epilogue. It was the main f***ing boss fight. The boss revived via bullshit reasons 4 times in a row, and it took a whole goddamn hour to finish reading. I literally skipped like 50% of the chapter and they were still fighting the boss. There was no epilogue. The fic took place 40 to 50 years ago, but there were DVDs. It wasn't the biggest plot point, but I just couldn't get past it. The author used mochas in a setting that I personally felt would not have access to them. Like, in theory, there's no real reason the setting couldn't have access to coffee and chocolate, but a minor side plot has the invention of granulated sugar, and therefore an easily transported and reliable form of sugar, happening, and neither coffee nor cocoa are ever mentioned, so it just felt weird and wrong to me. Back in the day, I read a scum fic that I just could not take seriously after a certain point. It was at a house party, and the characters were betting if 2 would kiss that night, and one saying, "I bet you 20 kroner they will." Like, they had very clearly just used the "I bet you 20 bucks" and put it to Norwegian currency without checking the conversion rate. Because, yeah, 20 Norwegian kroner is like $1.90 these days, and would have been less, too. It just really bugged me, but me and my sister do still use it as a phrase now. The author would bring up the main character's luscious auburn hair every other paragraph. I couldn't bring myself to read about his hair anymore. To top it off, the main character has plain brown hair. Any mention of greenette has me backspacing immediately. This was years ago, but I remember reading a fic once where the author said something like, "and she made hard eyes at him," or something to that effect. The eye rolling I did when closing that fic out, I haven't done since. The writing already came off so juvenile and hard to read, and that line fucking clinched it. I initially stuck out the terrible grammar and writing because the fic was hugely popular and involved a ship I enjoy. I've since learned that popular doesn't always equal good, and I will nope out in the first chapter if I'm not enjoying myself. I once came by a fanfic of one of my favorite characters. It had promotional art, good tags, good reviews, and was circulated a lot on Tumblr for its plot. The reason I couldn't get into it was because it was set in Italy. I started an enemies to lovers political AU that had potential, only for the male lead to go on about how brave the female lead was for being a Christian and wearing a cross. It reeked of the way some far-right people are determined to believe that they're victims. Unless she was a version of Joan of Arc, I'm with you on this. What fandom was this for? It was a Dramione Harry Potter fic. Mine was an exclamation mark at the end of all the dialogue. Just all of it. Are they constantly yelling? Yes, they simply are shouting after the author tags it with "she whispered." I was quite beside myself. There was a fic in the Naruto fandom that used the word hollered constantly, instead of said, yelled, etc. Every time that was said, I thought of hollers in Appalachia. There was another fic in the same fandom where the main couple showered after literally anything intimate. In the fic, I counted 16 times they showered. Well done for hygiene, I suppose. Kept spelling sure like sure with an H. I was fine the first few times, but every single time it was spelt like that, and I started going crazy. Anytime the way they write a character does not in any way align with how the character actually is, like making outspoken asshole characters be timid. An example of this I see a lot is Jace Lightwood. Like, that man doesn't have a timid, soft-spoken bone in his body. I dropped a fic that I was genuinely enjoying because they kept having one of the main characters call his lover bro unironically. Like, every other sentence. The first time, I was like, alright, he would not fucking say that, but who am I to snub someone for taking creative liberties? But then it happened again and again until I was literally cringing every time I read it. I genuinely tried to ignore it, but had to nope out after another chapter of it. It was less dropping a fic while reading it, and more just losing interest in the author's work in general, but I remember I used to read fics from an author who seemed nice and wrote really well for my favorite pairing in the fandom. I started getting turned off when I noticed how often she slipped in an insulting dig at the novel Wuthering Heights in her fics. Like, I can't remember the exact number, but she did it at least 3 times in 3 completely separate fics for the ship, and it weirded me out. I don't even care for the book itself that much, but the way she randomly had one half of the ship bitch about how bad it was always jarred me and took me out of the narrative every time she did it because it just read like her using the character as her mouthpiece. I stopped reading her fics because of it, which is a shame because she was otherwise a fantastic writer. I've done this. The author kept using glare, which usually has a negative context, such as anger or hate, in scenes such as he glared at her lovingly, or his glare was soft. They never once used the words gazed or gaze. I dropped a fic just yesterday because the author had sneered with every single line. He was always sneering, and this is a negative character, so he does sneer a lot. However, this was just excessive to the point where I wasn't sure if the author knew what sneering actually was. Once read a fic where the author used the euphemism beaver in a serious love scene. Not a huge deal, but it did put me off the story. The couple communicated too well. Technically, it was the last straw in a long list of me slowly realizing that I did not like the characterization or plot, but then we finally hit the smut scene and the main characters, who are both really weird about feelings in canon, were having perfect therapy speak communication, and I was like, 1, this is not hot, and 2, these are not my idiots. Anyway, I closed the fic and unsubscribed. There's this one character in my fandom that's gender fluid, but he presents male like 85% of the time and only changes his appearance about once a decade. Anyways, there was this one fic where his pronouns shifted like every sentence, and it just completely took me out of it. Years ago, I was enjoying a fic I thought was very well written. The only problem was that every chapter or so, the author used a word incorrectly. Not in an English second language way, but in a used a thesaurus for synonyms but didn't review the context in the dictionary way. I was okay with that, until I got to a word I had never seen before. Cromulent. How delightful! A word I didn't know. Yeah, turns out this person was unironically using a word made up on The Simpsons. Shouldn't have bothered me so much, but I clicked out of there in disgust. Literally every other line had annoying mistakes like would've/could've, and I don't think the writer ever managed to use there correctly, which was irritating, but not a complete deal breaker. Then I got to the author's note at the end of the first chapter, where the writer launched into a full-on whinge about not receiving enough kudos. This might just be me, but if you're going to beg for kudos, the least you could do is run your fic through Grammarly. Needless to say, I didn't finish the fic or give kudos to the writer. And I'm usually not stingy with kudos at all. I'll give almost anything I read on AO3 a kudos, even if I don't make it through the whole fic. This writer just rubbed me the wrong way. This reminds me of this fic series I read that I kind of liked, but immediately dropped when the author just casually made the main character a cannibal. Like, where the fuck did that come from? This reminds me of this one author in my fandom who writes straight-up torture porn, fine by me, and ends it with a long rant on veganism and how abortion is racist and evil. complete with several links to essays they've written on the subject. Alright. I'm so baffled, I don't even know how to respond to this. Big thank you to my Patreon members, my little Grues. Kuski55, Fallen Vexen, Sam, Dunk42, I Am a Noodle, John Huang, Fantastic Wreck, Laser Scorpio, Night Avenger, and Mintara. Thank you so much for your extra support on Patreon, it means the world to me. Hope you guys are doing well, you deserve the best, and I really appreciate you. I can't say it enough. And the same goes to my YouTube channel members, my mini-roos, AD, Taylor Thompson, Foxstar Killer, and Logan. Thank you so much for your extra support. I'm so glad to have you be a part of my channel. I hope you guys are doing really well too. I appreciate you so much. And thank you to everyone else who watched. Let me know in the comments what's a possibly stupid reason you stopped reading a fanfiction halfway through. No hate to any authors, sometimes we just have our pet peeves we can't handle. So be kind in the comments, but if you do want to get something off your chest, go ahead and do it. Hope you guys are having a good week, and I will see you in the next video.